Black girl denied first-class seat, unaware her father owns the airline. Trinity Williams woke up at 4:30 a.m. to the shrill beep of her alarm clock. Although she was used to early mornings, her mother, Denise, had always emphasized discipline. This morning felt different. Tomorrow was her 20th birthday, and the anticipation of flying to New York City for the first time filled her with a bubbly excitement. She had a big dream. She wanted to visit Columbia University's campus and imagine herself one day attending. More than that, she felt a thrilling sense of independence in traveling without her mother for the first time in her life. Trinity carefully zipped up her brand-new carry-on suitcase, bright teal with floral prints, a gift from her favorite aunt. She had packed everything meticulously, a few dresses, a couple pairs of jeans, comfortable shoes, and most importantly, a small leather journal where she recorded personal reflections. She wasn't the type to post everything on social media. She preferred to keep her most important thoughts close to her heart. By 5 a.m., her mother was awake too. Denise Williams was a striking woman with serene confidence and an air of quiet dignity. She worked long hours as a senior project manager for a small but reputable tech firm in Atlanta. Every single day, Denise reminded Trinity that the world sometimes demanded extra effort from a young black woman and to never give in to discouragement. That morning, Denise insisted on driving Trinity to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. "I don't mind, Mom," Trinity had said a dozen times. "I can take a lift." But Denise wouldn't hear of it. She wanted to share this moment with her daughter. The drive was filled with excited chatter about the sights Trinity wanted to see in New York: the Empire State Building, Times Square, the MoMA, Harlem, and, of course, a personal pilgrimage to Columbia's campus. The topic of Trinity's father rarely came up, but for some reason it hovered in the back of her mind today. Whenever she'd asked about him, her mother's response was always subdued. He was a man with big responsibilities and big dreams. "I decided early on that we'd be better off forging our own path." His name was Clarence Lancaster, though she'd changed her daughter's last name to Williams when Trinity was still a child. Trinity knew only a few details. Clarence was successful, very successful in fact, and had parted ways with her mother before Trinity was old enough to speak. But now wasn't the time to dive into old family complexities. Trinity just wanted to focus on her trip. She had a first-class ticket, courtesy of a lucky break she'd saved for months, and her mother added a little extra to upgrade her seat because it's time for new experiences. If only Trinity had known how ironically fateful that seat assignment would become. Hartsfield-Jackson was already a beehive of activity when they arrived. Denise leaned over the car console, gave Trinity a tight hug, and handed her a small envelope. "Open this on the plane," she whispered. "Mom, you didn't have to." But Denise just smiled and shook her head. "Enjoy your trip. Call me the moment you land. No excuses." Rolling her suitcase behind her, Trinity beamed with excitement. She felt unstoppable. Little did she know, fate was about to test her resolve in ways she never imagined. Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta International Airport, is one of the busiest airports in the world, and it felt like the entire city was hustling through its corridors that day. Trinity wove her way through travelers dragging suitcases, families huddling around baggage carts, and business people in crisp suits holding leather briefcases. She spotted the check-in desk for her airline, let's call it Global Skies, one of the premier airlines with a glowing international reputation. The line for first-class and elite passengers was conveniently shorter. Even so, Trinity noticed some glances from people around her. She had on a neat black blazer, simple jeans and white sneakers. She looked every bit the excited college-bound traveler, but a few onlookers seemed puzzled that someone like her was standing in the line for first class. Trinity shrugged it off. She was used to subtle looks when she stood in spaces people didn't expect her to occupy. As she advanced to the counter, the check-in agent, whose name tag read Brittany, gave her a tight-lipped smile. She seemed hesitant at first. "May I see your ticket and ID, please?" she asked politely. Trinity handed them over, trying to contain her excitement. She was about to step on a plane to New York City, first class no less. She could barely keep still. Brittany's eyebrows rose when she saw the first-class notation. She eyed Trinity curiously. There was no open hostility, but the vibe felt off. "Miss Williams, I see you're booked in first class. Are you traveling alone?" "Yes," Trinity answered, her voice bright. "I'm meeting a friend in New York. We're going to tour colleges and do some sightseeing." Brittany tapped a few keys. "Ah, that's nice," she said, but her expression was more perplexed than pleasant. "You'll be boarding from gate T8. Here's your boarding pass. Have a nice flight." Trinity thanked her, collected her documents, and rolled her suitcase toward the security checkpoint. She had no idea that behind her, Brittany was discreetly talking to her colleague, wondering out loud how someone so young, dressed casually and apparently unaccompanied, could afford a ticket in Global Sky's famously expensive first-class cabin. The security lines were standard airport chaos, but nothing out of the ordinary. Trinity navigated them with the ease of someone who had traveled often with her mother. Once she was through, she found a small coffee shop and bought a latte. After all, she had time to kill before boarding. She pulled out her phone, took a quick selfie, and sent it to her mom with a short text. "Headed to T8. Love you." The tension in the air was so subtle that Trinity barely noticed it. She only wondered if the weird glances might continue. Still, she reminded herself that she was used to being the only black person in certain rooms or the only woman in certain clubs. This trip was about breaking barriers and living her life. She refused to let awkwardness from strangers slow her down. The wait at the gate was uneventful. Trinity passed the time by skimming through articles about New York must-see spots. The gate area itself was mostly populated by business travelers. A few wore suits, some were busy on their laptops, and a handful tapped away on smartphones, presumably dealing with urgent corporate matters even before takeoff. A tall blonde woman in her 40s, another passenger, sat next to Trinity. She gave Trinity a glance, said nothing, then returned her gaze to her phone. Trinity hoped to strike up some friendly conversation, but sensed it wasn't welcome. She shrugged mentally. She had a window seat in first class waiting for her and a brand new e-book to read once she boarded. Then the first boarding announcement came over the intercom. Global Sky's Flight 1716 to New York's JFK is now boarding. First-class passengers and our premium elite members are welcome to board first. Trinity smiled, gathered her belongings, and approached the gate. Yet as she stepped forward, she noticed the gate agent giving her a wary look, this time with an audible sigh. The gate agent's name tag read Derek. He scanned Trinity's boarding pass, and she waited for the beep that would send her on her way. Instead, Derek frowned. "Miss, I'm sorry. There seems to be an issue with your seat. Can you step aside for a moment?" Trinity felt her stomach sink. "Is there a problem?" she asked softly. "We need to verify something." Derek motioned for her to stand near the side of the gate's podium, out of the main boarding line. She could feel curious eyes on her, some sympathetic, others openly judgmental. For a moment, she felt naked, as if she was on display. She wondered if she'd done something wrong. The memory of that subtle tension at check-in and the suspicious looks she'd received now floated back to her, and with that, the seeds of worry planted themselves in her mind. Yet she swallowed her anxiety, told herself it was just a technical glitch, and waited for Derek's next move. Trinity stood patiently, but her heart was thumping. She watched as Derek clicked around on his computer screen, brows furrowed, as if searching for a reason to justify the seat change. Then, in a polite but firm tone, he said, "Miss Williams, I'm going to have to reassign your seat. There appears to be a double booking situation in first class, and you may have been bumped to economy." She blinked. "But I purchased a first-class ticket," she replied, the edge in her voice sharper than she intended. "I have the email confirmation. Your colleague at check-in didn't say anything about a seat change." The other passengers began streaming onto the jet bridge, many of them giving Trinity side glances as they passed. Some wore small smirks, as if they'd decided Trinity must have been mistaken about her seat in the first place. A few had concern etched across their features, but nobody spoke up. Derek tapped on his keyboard again. "I understand, miss, but sometimes the system just auto-selects who gets bumped. It's nothing personal. We're oversold in first class. Unfortunately, your seat is no longer available." Trinity's hands trembled. She felt the warmth of embarrassment creep up her neck. She forced herself to speak calmly. "I understand that overselling can happen, but I paid extra for first class. I've never heard of an airline bumping someone who actually paid for it." She paused, deciding to keep it logical rather than emotional. "Could you please check for alternative solutions? Perhaps there's another passenger on a lower fare or someone who volunteered to move." Derek sighed again, clearly wanting to end the conversation as quickly as possible. "We're out of time. If you want to get to New York on this flight, I have to put you in economy. Otherwise, you can stay behind and try for the next flight, but I can't guarantee there will be a seat for you then." Trinity felt tears brimming. She wasn't a crier, especially not in public, but the injustice ignited a swirl of anger and humiliation. She lowered her voice and leaned in. "Is there any reason I'm being singled out? Everyone else in line got to board without a problem." "Miss, are you implying—" Derek began, his tone flustered. "I'm only asking," she interjected. "I'm a paying passenger with a valid first-class ticket, yet you're asking me to step aside publicly and—" "Look," Derek cut her off. "I don't know your situation, and I frankly don't care. There's a seat in economy with your name on it, or you can step out of line." That did it. Trinity's frustration exploded. "I'd like to speak to a supervisor, please," she demanded. By now, other passengers, some with mild interest, others pointedly ignoring the scene, were stepping around them to board. The boarding area started to empty, but the tension thickened. Derek rolled his eyes and reluctantly picked up the telephone. "Supervisor to gate T8, please," he announced over the PA system. Trinity was fuming inside. She recalled her mother's advice to remain poised, no matter how trying a situation might be, so she took a slow breath. "You'd better call them fast," she said, "because the plane is about to leave." A few tense minutes later, a man in a crisp black uniform, identified by his name tag as Supervisor Mills, strode up. His expression was a mask of polite sternness. Derek explained the double booking situation, painting a picture that seemed to suggest Trinity was being uncooperative. Trinity listened, arms crossed, her heart racing. Supervisor Mills turned to Trinity. "Let's see your ticket, miss." She handed it over along with her phone, showing the email confirmation of her purchase. Mills scanned them carefully. He paused for a long moment, glanced at Derek, and then sighed. "The system is indeed showing a conflict with seat 2A, he admitted, "but that doesn't automatically mean you have to be moved to economy. Let me check if there are any upgrades or volunteer moves." Trinity's heart lifted in cautious hope. Finally, someone who was actually trying to help. But a new voice interrupted them. "What's the hold-up here?" It came from behind them. A slender, impeccably dressed woman with a silver bob cut and haughty posture stepped off the jet bridge. Her Global Skies uniform marked her as a senior flight attendant. Her name tag read, Alicia. Supervisor Mills gave a brief explanation. Alicia eyed Trinity, her lips pursed. "Is everything correct with her ticket?" she asked pointedly. "Yes, it appears so," Mills said. "I'm checking for alternative solutions, but—" "Let's make this simple," Alicia said briskly, turning to Trinity. "If you won't move to economy voluntarily, we'll have to discuss offloading you. You're holding up the flight." Trinity's stomach churned. She could hardly believe her ears. "Offloading me? I have a legitimate ticket." Alicia's expression hardened. "We have protocols, Miss Williams, is it? We're not obligated to keep you in first class if there's an issue with your seat." Supervisor Mills looked uncomfortable. He scanned his tablet, eyebrows knitting together. "There is a seat available in first-class seat 4F, but it's reserved for a passenger on a connecting flight. That passenger is arriving late." Well, that passenger isn't here, Trinity pointed out, trying to stay measured. Shouldn't I be able to take that seat? I paid for first class after all. Alicia shook her head, her voice growing icier. We hold seats for connecting passengers. It's standard practice. Supervisor Mills gave a conflicted look to Alicia, then Derek, and back to Trinity. Finally, after a heavy sigh, he said, "Let's see if we can place Miss Williams in 4FE. If the connecting passenger arrives in time, we might have to switch again." Alicia's lips thinned, but she nodded grudgingly. It was better than forcibly offloading Trinity, which might cause a bigger scene. "Fine," Alicia said at last. "But we need to move quickly. I don't want any further delays." Trinity felt a small victory surge within her. She gathered her carry-on, made sure her documents were safe in her backpack, and followed Alicia onto the jet bridge. Her relief, however, was short-lived. The stares from the flight attendants lining the entry, the pointed hush that fell as she passed, she felt unwelcome, singled out. Yet she refused to buckle under the scrutiny. Finally, she walked through the first-class cabin, noticing the plush seats, the extra legroom, the overhead bins nearly empty. It should have been a moment of delight, her first time in such luxury, but the row she approached was empty, except for a single middle-aged man across the aisle who watched her with curiosity. She placed her suitcase in the overhead bin, took her seat, and tried to quell the swirl of emotions. An underlying tension had rooted itself. She wasn't sure if it was because she was young, or black, or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Possibly all three. But Trinity promised herself then and there that she wouldn't let them see her tears. She was stronger than that. The plane door closed. The connecting passenger never showed up. Trinity pressed her head against the seat, sighed in relief, and reminded herself of her mother's words, "Don't let anyone tell you where you do and don't belong." As the plane taxied out onto the runway, Trinity let out a shaky breath. She had never felt more disillusioned by the act of flying. Her earlier excitement had been replaced with a heavy, uncomfortable feeling in the pit of her stomach. She'd done everything right, paid for her ticket fair and square, yet had to fight just to stay in the seat she rightfully purchased. Alicia, the senior flight attendant, proceeded to do her safety demonstration in the aisle. Although the demonstration was for everyone, Trinity felt a sense of silent tension from Alicia's sideways glances. It was as if Alicia was still measuring her, deciding whether Trinity was a troublemaker. With the plane at cruising altitude, the flight attendants began the first-class service. Alicia came around with drinks and a forced professional smile. Trinity just asked for water, her appetite dulled by stress. Alicia's politeness was frigid, painfully polite, yet devoid of warmth. Trinity tried to not let it get to her. She thought of calling her mother, but she remembered the envelope Denise had given her at the airport. Maybe reading her mother's message would calm her nerves. She reached into her backpack and slid out the small pink envelope. The flap was sealed with a tiny heart sticker. Trinity peeled it open carefully, revealing a folded piece of pastel stationery. A faint scent of her mother's signature perfume drifted up. In neat handwriting, the note read, "My dearest Trinity, I'm so proud of the woman you're becoming. As you take this big step toward your future, remember that no matter what life throws at you, you have everything you need inside of you to persevere. It's been just you and me for a long time, and there's nothing we can't overcome. You always ask about your father, and I'm sorry I never gave you a straightforward answer. I wanted you to grow up without feeling overshadowed by the magnitude of who he is. But if you ever choose to contact him, I'll support you. In case life surprises you, know this: never doubt your worth, never apologize for who you are, and don't let anyone define you by their limited perspective. I love you, sweetheart. Call me anytime. I will always pick up. With love and pride, Mom." Reading the message was like having a warm blanket wrapped around her. Trinity felt tears prick her eyes. Her mother's words were both comforting and mysterious. "The magnitude of who he is," Denise had written. Trinity had always known that her father was a successful businessman. She had never guessed just how influential he might be. She slipped the note back into the envelope, deciding she would reflect on it later, perhaps in a quieter setting. For now, she had to settle her own emotions. She was on her way to New York to chase a dream, stepping onto a campus that might define her future. The flight progressed, and Trinity tried to distract herself with a movie, yet every so often the memory of Derek's dismissive attitude, Alicia's cold courtesy, and the uncertain reference to her father's magnitude would cycle through her mind. Halfway through the flight, Alicia returned to offer lunch. "Chicken or pasta?" she asked, handing Trinity a menu with a forced smile. "Chicken, please," Trinity replied softly. She thought about extending a friendly word, maybe something to lighten the tension, but Alicia turned away almost as soon as Trinity spoke. Trinity swallowed the knot in her throat. She told herself to stay calm, to let it go. After all, she'd finally kept the seat. She'd be in New York soon. She would see her friend from high school, who now lived in the city, and then she'd get a glimpse of Columbia University. It was a dream she'd nurtured for years, one that felt closer than ever. In that moment, Trinity resolved not to let the negativity overshadow her trip. She'd worked too hard and come too far. Yet, unbeknownst to her, this incident was merely the tip of the iceberg. A bigger storm was brewing, one that would rattle the foundations of global skies, reveal the hidden identity of her father, and force everyone involved to confront their biases head-on. The plane touched down at JFK Airport in New York, rolling along the tarmac under a clear blue sky. Trinity gazed out the window at the sprawling airport, trying to will her excitement to override the unpleasant experience she'd just had. As the seatbelt sign switched off, she gathered her backpack and waited her turn to exit. Alicia stood at the cabin door, saying goodbye to first-class passengers as they deplaned. Trinity gave a polite nod, though part of her wanted to simply walk past without acknowledgement. Alicia responded with a clipped, "Have a nice day." The words rang hollow, but Trinity forced a polite smile in return. She stepped into the jet bridge, then into the busy terminal. The wave of incoming and outgoing passengers rushed around her. New York's energy radiated, fueling Trinity's excitement. Despite her nerves, the city felt like a place of endless possibility, like electricity humming beneath her feet. Yet she couldn't quite shake the tension of the flight. She decided to locate the Global Skies customer service desk. She felt she owed it to herself to file a quick complaint, or at least talk to someone about what had happened. The customer service desk, perched near the baggage claim, was staffed by 2 agents. One was assisting another passenger, while the other, whose name tag said Gabriel, waved Trinity over. "How can I help you?" he said, greeting her with a polite smile. Trinity explained the seat issue, how she was nearly bumped to economy despite having paid for first class, and how the staff had treated her in a dismissive manner. She kept her tone calm but firm, detailing the facts of the ordeal. Gabriel listened with sympathetic eyes. "I'm very sorry to hear that happened," he said. "That's not the level of service we strive for." He typed something into his computer. "I'm going to open a formal complaint under your reservation. Someone from our corporate office will review this and get back to you within a few business days." "Thank you," Trinity replied, exhaling a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "I appreciate your help." "Again, I apologize. Let me see if there are any miles or a partial refund we can offer. It might take some time, but rest assured, Global Skies takes these matters seriously." Gabriel's voice was gentle, his manner warm and sincere, such a stark contrast to the tension Trinity had experienced earlier. Feeling slightly vindicated, Trinity thanked Gabriel once more and retrieved her luggage from the carousel. With her bag in tow, she made her way to the arrivals area, scanning the crowd for her friend, Jade, who had promised to pick her up. She spotted Jade almost instantly, a tall, regal young woman with braided hair, wearing a bright yellow sundress. Jade's face lit up when she saw Trinity, and they fell into a warm embrace. "How was your flight?" Jade asked, lugging one of Trinity's suitcases. Trinity forced a laugh. "Long story. Let's just say I've had better experiences." Jade frowned. "Uh-oh, that sounds serious. Want to tell me about it on the subway? I didn't drive." By the way, I thought we'd jump straight into the whole New York experience." Trinity nodded. "Absolutely." She glanced back at the baggage claim area, lingering on a cluster of Global Skies employees chatting among themselves, and felt a prickling sensation of unresolved tension. Despite the relief of meeting Jade, Trinity sensed that the story wasn't over. Something about this entire situation felt like a prelude to a bigger revelation. Together, the two friends headed out of the airport and stepped into the swirl of noise and color that was New York City. Trinity inhaled sharply, letting the sounds of honking taxis, the chatter of travelers, and the faint smell of roasted nuts from a nearby vendor fill her senses. For a moment, she closed her eyes, just soaking it in. She was here, the city of her dreams, yet beneath her excitement, a small ember of frustration glowed, waiting for the right moment to reignite. The flight had ended, but the consequences of that discrimination were only beginning. Neither Trinity nor Global Skies could guess that her complaint would eventually reach the top of the corporate ladder and land in the inbox of a man named Clarence Lancaster, the majority owner of the airline, and Trinity's unknown father. 3 days passed in a blur of city exploration. Trinity fell in love with New York's electric pulse. She and Jade shopped along Fifth Avenue, snacked on hot dogs from street carts, and took pictures in Times Square. Trinity's favorite stop, however, was Harlem. She'd read about its history, the Harlem Renaissance, the iconic Apollo Theater. Standing on the sidewalks, she felt a deep connection to the cultural legacy swirling around her. Yet amid all the excitement, Trinity felt an undercurrent of restless curiosity. She kept thinking about her mother's letter. "If you ever choose to contact him, I'll support you." The notion poked at her when she was least expecting it, like when she was riding the subway or lying in the spare bedroom of Jade's Brooklyn apartment at night. Her father was out there, possibly in the same city. Did he think of her? Did he wonder who she'd become? Meanwhile, at a sleek skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan, a tall, imposing man sat at a polished mahogany desk. This was Clarence Lancaster, major shareholder and de facto leader of Global Skies. He was reviewing emails from the corporate office that morning when a particular message caught his attention. Subject: discrimination complaint. Flight 1716 ATL to JFK. Dear Mr. Lancaster, we received a complaint regarding potential discriminatory treatment on Flight 1716 originating from ATL. The passenger, Ms. Trinity Williams, reports being denied her first-class seat despite having a legitimate ticket. We are investigating the matter. As per protocol, we want to keep you informed about any possible PR or legal ramifications. Sincerely, Melissa Porter, Head of Customer Relations, Global Skies. Clarence leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing his temples. He saw more complaints than he cared to. The airline was large after all, but something about this name Trinity Williams made his hands still on the keyboard. Trinity. That was the name Denise had chosen for their daughter. He allowed himself a moment of introspection. It couldn't be the same person. Or could it? The last time he'd seen his daughter, she was just a baby in Denise's arms. Clarence and Denise had parted ways under messy circumstances, all rooted in the growing empire of his airline and his complicated personal life. He'd long since resigned himself to the reality that his daughter was better off without him. But now, in black and white, a complaint from someone named Trinity, and the passenger was traveling alone from Atlanta, where Denise still lived. He reread the complaint, which included a summary of the passenger's experience. Anger flared in his chest at the mention of possible discrimination. He'd built Global Skies with the aspiration of setting industry standards for inclusivity and customer care. The irony that his own daughter might have been treated poorly by his employees gnawed at him. Clarence stared at the email, unsure how to proceed. He'd spent decades building a fortress around his life, carefully keeping the existence of his daughter out of the public eye. But if this complaint was real, and if it was indeed his Trinity, he owed it to her to do something. He rose from his desk, walked to the floor to ceiling windows. Manhattan sprawled beneath him, a concrete testament to success and ambition. But right now, success felt hollow. He needed to verify if this Trinity Williams was really his daughter, and he needed to ensure that the airline rectified the situation immediately. Picking up his phone, he dialed the head of customer relations directly. "Melissa, it's Clarence." "Yes, regarding the complaint from Ms. Trinity Williams, I want more details, flight records, gate interactions, everything. And I want it on my desk by this afternoon." His voice was taut, leaving no room for argument. Yet his mind churned with conflicting emotions. For years, he'd avoided seeing Trinity to shield her from the chaos of his corporate life. Now, ironically, she'd been thrust into that very chaos without even knowing who he was. On Trinity's 4th day in the city, she decided to tour Columbia University. Jade came along, snapping photos of the historic campus with its grand neoclassical buildings. Trinity felt a sense of destiny, walking the pathways she hoped would be part of her future. While strolling near the iconic low library steps, Trinity's phone buzzed. She paused to check it, expecting a text from her mom, but it was an unknown number. Curious, she answered. "Hello? Hello, is this Trinity Williams?" The voice on the other end was female, polite, and businesslike. "Yes, speaking," Trinity replied, exchanging a look of curiosity with Jade. "My name is Melissa Porter. I'm head of customer relations at Global Skies Airlines. We received your complaint, and we'd like to talk to you about what happened on Flight 1716. Is now a good time?" Trinity's heart skipped a beat. She stepped away from Jade, who watched with a raised brow. "Yes, I can talk," Trinity said, her tone guarded. Melissa Porter explained that the airline was deeply concerned about her experience. They were actively investigating the conduct of the gate agent Derek, the flight attendant Alicia, and any other staff involved. "We want to make this right," Melissa said. "How exactly do you plan to do that?" Trinity asked, keeping her voice even. She was surprised by how firm she sounded, given that her stomach was doing flips. Melissa paused. "We'd like to offer you a full refund of your ticket, as well as a personal apology from our executive team. Additionally, we're going to conduct a review of our training protocols to ensure we maintain a discrimination-free environment." Trinity blinked. A full refund? That was definitely a big gesture. She also noted the mention of a personal apology from the executive team. Was that standard procedure? She glanced at Jade, who mouthed, "What's going on?" Trinity held up a finger, signaling she'd explain later. Melissa continued, "If you're available, we'd also like to invite you to our corporate office in Manhattan to discuss any further concerns. We believe meeting face-to-face could be more constructive." Trinity hesitated. She wasn't sure if she wanted to walk into the lion's den, but part of her was curious, especially in light of her mother's letter hinting about her father's significant position. "I'm in Manhattan for a few more days," she finally said, "so I guess I could come by." "Wonderful," Melissa said, relief evident in her tone. "I'll schedule a meeting. One of our top executives, possibly Mr. Lancaster himself, would like to apologize in person. We can accommodate your schedule, just let me know what works." Trinity stiffened at the sound of Lancaster. The name made her heart pound. "Mr. Lancaster," she repeated. "And who is he exactly?" "He's the primary owner of Global Skies," Melissa answered matter-of-factly. "He's usually quite busy, but he asked to be informed personally about your complaint." Trinity's thoughts reeled. Lancaster, that was her father's last name too. Could it be him? Could he really be that high up? Her mind flickered to her mother's letter. He was a man with big responsibilities and big dreams. A swirl of emotions, hope, confusion, anger gripped her. I'll need a day or two to confirm my schedule," Trinity stammered, trying to keep her composure. "I appreciate the call." After hanging up, Jade pressed her. "What was that all about?" Trinity inhaled a shaky breath. "The airline wants to apologize and offer a refund. But, Jade, I think the owner might be my father." Jade's eyes widened in shock. "Wait, what? Are you serious?" Trinity nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "My father's name is Clarence Lancaster. This airline's majority owner is a Lancaster. I have a feeling." "Oh my God," Jade whispered. "Trin, that's huge." "Yeah," Trinity said, staring off into the distance. The majestic columns of Low Library loomed behind her, but her mind was far from the campus now. She had so many questions. Why had her mother never told her that her father owned a major airline? Did Clarence suspect who she was? Would he acknowledge her? Little did she know, Clarence Lancaster was grappling with the exact same questions, preparing for a meeting that would turn both their worlds upside down. 2 days later, Trinity found herself riding an elevator up to the 41st floor of a gleaming glass skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. She smoothed down her simple but elegant black blazer, her nerves a bundle of excitement and dread. Jade was waiting in the building's lobby, offering moral support from afar. Trinity had insisted on going up alone. This was something she needed to face herself. The elevator doors opened to a sleek reception area. A smiling assistant in a tailored navy suit greeted her. "Miss Williams, right this way, Mr. Lancaster and Miss Porter will see you now." Trinity forced a polite smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her heart hammering. She was led down a short corridor of frosted glass walls into a spacious conference room with an expansive view of Manhattan's skyline. 2 people stood inside. One was a sharp-featured woman in her early 50s, Melissa Porter, presumably. Next to her was a tall man with broad shoulders, silver-streaked hair, and an air of understated power. She recognized him at once from a photo she'd once seen in her mother's keepsakes. Clarence Lancaster. "Thank you for coming, Mizzy." "Williams," Melissa said, gesturing to a seat at the long conference table. "Please have a seat. Can we get you anything? Water, coffee?" Trinity shook her head. She was too tense to drink or eat. She carefully set down her handbag, eyes flicking to Clarence. She noted he had the same shade of deep brown skin as hers, the same shape of eyes. She wondered if he noticed. Clarence approached, extending his hand. "Trinity, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Clarence Lancaster," he said, his voice a velvety baritone. She detected the slightest tremor in his tone, as though he was far from calm beneath the surface. Trinity shook his hand, 1,000 unspoken questions swirling in her mind. Did he guess who I am? If so, was he going to admit it? Could she even broach the topic in front of a third party? Melissa cleared her throat, her eyes darting between them curiously. "Shall we begin? Ms. Williams, I understand you had a concerning experience on Flight 1716. We've completed an investigation, and we'd like to share our findings and our plan to ensure this never happens again." Trinity forced her focus back to the matter at hand. She nodded, mentally cataloguing her father's expressions. Was that guilt in his eyes, or was she imagining it? Melissa explained that gate agent Derek had been found in violation of company policy by attempting to bump Trinity from her seat without properly following procedures. The flight attendant Alicia had also acted unprofessionally by threatening to offload Trinity without exploring other solutions. Both employees were being subjected to disciplinary review and diversity training. "We sincerely apologize for any discrimination you experienced," Melissa said formally, her voice smooth and practiced. "Global Skies prides itself on inclusivity. We'd like to offer you a formal apology and a gesture of goodwill." At that, Clarence spoke up. "In addition to the full refund, I'm authorizing a substantial number of mileage points to be added to your account," he said, folding his hands. "It's the least we can do, Ms. Williams." Trinity took a moment to process. "Thank you," she managed, her voice steady but quiet. Part of her wanted to simply accept the apology, take the refund, and leave. But a larger part of her, one that remembered her mother's letter, burned with the need to address the bigger question. She cast a sidelong glance at Melissa, who seemed to be waiting for Trinity's response. "I appreciate the resolution," Trinity began, pausing to gather her courage. Then she looked directly at Clarence. "But there's another matter I wanted to discuss. A personal matter, actually." Melissa's eyebrows arched slightly. Clarence's face remained stoic, though she sensed tension in his posture. "Would you mind if I spoke to Mr. Lancaster privately?" Trinity asked politely, turning to Melissa. "If that's all right with you." Melissa hesitated, glancing between them. "Of course," she said slowly. "I can wait outside. Let me know if you need anything." She rose, collected her folder, and left the room with measured steps. Now it was just the two of them, father and daughter, alone in the high-rise conference room. Trinity stood, walked to the tall windows, staring out at the city below. She sensed rather than heard Clarence move to stand behind her. Finally, she turned to face him. "I think you know who I am," she said, her voice subdued. Clarence's face cracked with raw emotion. "Yes," he whispered. "The moment I saw your name in the complaint, I suspected. When I saw you in person, it confirmed everything." Trinity folded her arms, fighting back tears. "Why didn't you say anything?" His gaze dropped. "I was ashamed, maybe. I left you and your mother years ago, convinced that it was safer for you to be away from my world, all the press and scrutiny. I thought I was sparing you. Did you ever think that maybe I wanted to know my father?" Trinity's voice trembled. She had so many emotions swirling inside her, hurt, anger, a small flicker of hope. Clarence swallowed hard. "I tried to stay informed about your life from a distance. I provided financially when Denise allowed it, but she returned most of it. She said you two were doing fine on your own." He sighed heavily. "I respected your mother's wishes, and I kept my distance, though it tore at me daily." Trinity squeezed her eyes shut. The anger she felt warred with the part of her that understood the complexity. "She never told me you owned an airline," she murmured. "She only said you were important, that you had big responsibilities." Clarence gave a small, humorless laugh. "Important. That's one way to put it. I never wanted you to feel overshadowed or obligated. I wanted you to live freely, on your own terms." Trinity took a deep breath, tears threatening to spill. "So this is how we meet over a discrimination complaint at your airline." He reached out, gently resting a hand on her shoulder. The contact nearly broke her resolve, but she stayed strong. "I'm sorry, Trinity. I wanted better for you. I would never have allowed you to be treated that way on my airline had I known." She pulled away, hugging herself. I need time to process this," she said, voice trembling. "It's not just about the seat. It's about everything. All these years." Clarence nodded, sorrow etched in his features. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Their eyes met, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Trinity saw regret in his gaze, and he, perhaps, saw the flicker of a wound too deep for quick apologies to heal. After a long moment of silence, she motioned toward the door. "I think I should go now. My friend is waiting downstairs." "Trinity," he said softly, "please, let me take you to lunch or dinner before you leave New York, if you'd like. Just to talk." She swallowed. Part of her was screaming to run, to never speak to him again. Another part, that curious child inside her, craved a real conversation with her father. "All right," she said at length. "Maybe tomorrow. I'll text your office with a time that works." Clarence nodded, his gaze flicking briefly to the city skyline outside. "I'll be waiting." With that, she walked out, brushing past Melissa in the corridor, who greeted her with a quick, professional smile. Jade was waiting by the elevator, eyes brimming with questions. Trinity just shook her head, holding back tears until the elevator doors slid shut. Her mind reeled. Global Skies belonged to her father. He was unbelievably wealthy, unbelievably powerful, and for nearly 2 decades, unbelievably absent. What was she supposed to do with that realization? Trinity spent a sleepless night in Jade's apartment, replaying every detail of the conversation with her father. Her thoughts churned with a storm of emotions. By morning, she decided she had to at least meet with him one more time. If nothing else, she needed closure. She texted the number his assistant provided. "I can meet for lunch tomorrow, 1 p.m., the Skylight Bistro near Columbus Circle." The reply came within minutes. "That would be perfect. See you then, Clarence." That day, Trinity went about her schedule robotically, visiting a few more places with Jade, yet she was a million miles away in her thoughts. Jade, sensing her distraction, mostly let her be. By the time 1 p.m. rolled around the next day, Trinity walked into the Skylight Bistro, a chic restaurant perched on a high floor overlooking Central Park. She found Clarence seated at a corner table, away from prying eyes. They exchanged awkward greetings. Clarence's attempt at a warm smile faltered, overshadowed by his visible tension. They ordered light lunches, Trinity a salad, Clarence a steak, and then sat in awkward silence until Clarence cleared his throat. "Trinity, thank you for coming. I know this is hard." She nodded, swirling her water glass. "It is," she admitted, looking out at the view of Central Park. "I have questions, lots of them, but I'm not sure where to start." Clarence leaned forward. "Ask whatever you need to. I'm an open book now." So she did. She asked about his life, his background, why he chose to build an airline, why he never tried to contact her directly. The conversation flowed, at times tense and emotional, at times surprisingly comfortable. Clarence explained that Global Skies was once a small charter airline he inherited, which he expanded aggressively. The stress, the constant travel, and the media scrutiny wrecked his relationship with Denise. "Your mother," Clarence said, eyes downcast. "She was the best thing that ever happened to me. But I was so obsessed with success, I lost focus of what mattered." Trinity listened, tears occasionally welling in her eyes as she realized the depth of what she'd missed. By dessert, a fragile understanding had formed. She still felt hurt, but she saw a flicker of sincerity in her father's remorse. As they walked out, Clarence placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'd like to be part of your life if you'll let me," he said softly. Trinity bit her lip, torn between longing and resentment. "I need time," she repeated. "I might be willing to talk occasionally, but trust, that might take longer." He nodded. "I understand, and I'll do everything I can to earn it." They parted ways on the sidewalk. Just as Trinity was about to descend into the subway station, Clarence called her name. She turned, raising her brows. "I forgot to mention," he said, stepping closer to avoid the crowd. "We concluded the review of the employees involved Derek and Alicia. They've been issued suspensions without pay and must undergo extensive retraining. And if there's a next time, they will be fired." Trinity studied his face. "That's good," she said. "They deserve some consequences." Clarence's jaw tightened. The manager who oversaw them, Supervisor Mills, was also put on notice. "We need to root out every instance of bias in our ranks." A swirl of satisfaction mixed with sadness ran through Trinity. "I appreciate you telling me," she murmured. Then she offered a small smile and vanished into the station. The story didn't end there. Word of the incident leaked to the press partly because other passengers on Flight 1716 had posted social media videos of the confrontation at the gate. Soon, headlines read, "Global Skies founder's daughter faces discrimination on airline, sparks reform." Many accused the airline of hypocrisy, touting diversity in commercials while employees discriminated in reality. The backlash forced Global Skies to announce a broad sweep of policy reforms, including a new training program aimed at eliminating racial bias. Derek and Alicia found themselves at the center of a public storm. Their suspensions turned into terminations when additional complaints came to light from other passengers. Supervisor Mills, who had looked the other way on multiple occasions, also resigned amidst the scandal. Clarence Lancaster didn't hide from the blowback. In an unprecedented move, he went on a major news show, acknowledging systemic issues within his company and pledging transparent changes. The public saw it as a bold step toward accountability, though some remained skeptical. Trinity watched it all unfold from afar, back in Atlanta, She sometimes felt a pang of guilt that individuals lost their jobs, but she remembered how they'd treated her, and likely others in the same way. Actions have consequences, she reminded herself. Her relationship with Clarence was still fragile. They spoke on the phone occasionally, small steps toward building something neither had ever had. Denise, for her part, was wary but willing to let Trinity navigate her own path. "Just be careful," she warned. "Clarence means well, but he's used to getting what he wants." Eventually, Trinity decided to accept a partial scholarship from Columbia. She relocated to New York with the help of her mother. Clarence offered financial support, which Trinity initially declined. She wanted to maintain her independence. However, she allowed him to pay for her textbooks. It was a small gesture, a compromise that didn't feel like a handout. On the first day of classes, Trinity walked across the campus lawn, textbooks pressed to her chest. The crisp autumn air smelled of falling leaves and possibility. She felt the weight of her name and her father's influence in the background, but she also felt the power of her own choices. She was more than just the daughter of a wealthy airline owner. She was Trinity Williams, forging her own destiny. High above, a plane flew past, leaving a white contrail. Trinity paused, shading her eyes as she stared at it. She thought of that fateful flight, of the humiliations she endured, and of the unexpected reunion it brought about. Life, she realized, had a way of weaving tragedies and blessings together. Sometimes, the hardest hits of karma were exactly what people needed to change. "Perhaps that's true for me and my father both," she mused. With a renewed sense of purpose, Trinity turned and headed to class, determined to rise above obstacles and claim the future she deserved.